Hi, welcome to the IndieWinePodcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 2, first full episode. I spoke with Noel Diaz of Purity Wines and the Steady Wine Bar, both in Richmond, California, about how he got his start in wine, farming for natural winemaking. And Noel also talked a lot about collaboration and working with other winemakers in a cooperative facility, but also how he collaborates with artists and musicians as well. Noel's wife Barry and him also run the Steady Wine Bar, which is located in the front of the winery. And that's where we recorded this episode, right before opening time on a Saturday afternoon.
Purity came about because I was at a point in my life. I worked in the restaurant business most of my adult life as a way to put me through school. I was a film major. I'd always wanted to be doing something creative. And I got to the point where the restaurant business was changing. It was not what I had signed on for years before. And I had kind of it's run its course with me. I needed something. I was a server. I got into management. I got into wine. I was a somm for a while. So those were, I would probably wanted to have had my own place eventually. But I had also, with my wife, had talked about doing a film project at some point because I was finished with that. I had done some small films, but so we had some savings for that. So I knew I wanted to do something. I knew I wanted to move on from the restaurant business. And what I wanted to do was the question. I had made some short films that I really didn't love. I'm not a natural, I wasn't a natural filmmaker. It was a lot of, and as a whole, it's very much a team effort. And so I determined that was not, I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to make a living as a filmmaker. And so then I thought, well, as I was getting more and more into wine, becoming a somm, and thinking about what I might want to do with basically the second half of my life, I thought the idea was to maybe become a negociant, the way that you think of the romantic idea of somebody running around in a little Peugeot or a little Fiat and heading off into the hills of wine country, going to wineries, buying finished wine, putting my chalk mark on them, send that back to my winery or my facility or whatever. And then I felt strongly enough about my palate that I could blend and make something unique that would be good enough to sell and possibly make a living on. As I was researching doing that, and I was making connections, I realized I needed a winemaker's permit. The easiest way to do that, the most direct way, would just to have a winemaker's permit. And I had talked to a friend of mine who's a beverage law attorney, and she said, well, that'll answer a lot of problems. Just get a winemaker's permit. You don't have to make a lot, and then you can do a lot of things. And so I did that. And once I started making wine, there was no turning back. Why natural? So natural wine, I've been drinking probably since the late 90s. Paulo Bea with Chinobium was probably one of the first ones that I had that showed me that there could be something else. It was a different experience. It was a textured white wine, and I loved it. And then I wanted to know more about natural wine and what natural wine meant. And at that time, there's always the kind of the mythology and the lore that you get into. You don't realize this until I think until, for me at least, I guess, until you start to get in it. Once you're in the milieu, you then can see it in a different way. You see the machine working, right? It's like the idea, like I tell people, like the sausage, you don't necessarily want to see the sausage being made, but
Sure.
You might really like the sausage. So once I got in there, I thought, okay, I like this, and I would like to kind of go along this path. And when I started, I got lucky. So a lot of times people will ask me, well, how'd you learn how to make wine? And I tell people, like, I am self-taught, but I don't live in a vacuum. As when I was a wine buyer, I met a lot of winemakers. I'm an obsessive reader, and I ask a lot of questions. So I would have winemakers come in, and I would start to just corroborate with what one was saying and why they like this and what somebody else said and how they did this and how they did that. and I started to build a certain level of knowledge. Once I started making wine, I knew the very kind of basics. I also bought a basic winemaking book, which, though not centered in natural, really took me through the like what happens, what yeasts are for, what enzymes are for, what bacteria is for, how those all
Kind
interrelate
of the
with the
nuts and
fruit.
bolts
Yeah,
of
very
it.
simple, and it's a wine. It's a book that I generally will recommend anyone who comes into this collective that we have in Richmond. I will generally say it's good to just read this, and it's hard because I'll meet people who they want to read about natural wine. They don't want to read about somebody saying this is why you add yeast, why you go and buy yeast. This is why you do these things that nobody wants to do. But I try to give them a foundation. I remember I had been in the business for many years, and I was talking to a sommelier, and he said something that was a throwaway little description of a wine, and I stopped and I realized I didn't know the more specifics of the differences between how white wine is pressed and the juice is turned into wine, and how red grapes are pressed and how they're macerated. I didn't. It was a weird feeling, and if I thought about it, I could go, okay, well that makes sense. But I just didn't know it. I knew a lot of producers. I knew a lot of different styles. I knew a lot of different grapes, but I just didn't know that end. And so that's why I would like to give that recommendation of that basic book in case there's something that somebody doesn't realize.
What book is that?
It is The Way to Make Wine.
Okay.
And it is by a winemaker who worked, I think, at Rosenblum Cellars in
Oh,
Alameda.
okay.
And then he wrote this book, and it's. I tell people just to go on to Amazon and you can get a used copy for $6.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's whether it's a current updated version, he's going to cover the same basics. So it's just
Yeah.
really to read it. I have it laying around here, and a lot of time, and I haven't read it in years, but I have it laying around here just so I can show people what it looks like. So I happened to get lucky. I found this space on Treasure Island that was a warehouse space where that been permitted for winemaking. I got in there, and then I met somebody so there wasn't a natural wine place. It was just a wine place. And I just needed a place to park a permit and then to grow from. And I wanted to be an urban winemaker because I wanted to be one. I live here. I live in the Bay Area. I didn't want to have something in Sonoma or Napa. I thought that would be expensive. I didn't want to have something in Lodi because it's going to be a long drive just to do something. So I wanted to be an urban winemaker. And I liked that idea. The idea of going out, picking up my fruit, driving it back, making the wine, and then having access to a way to sell wine, because I always felt I wanted to sell it direct. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that, but I wanted to be close to networking. So then I happened to fall into this space where there was another winemaker who he was actually helping somebody who was making wine there, and he knew different natural wine. It was just a coincidence.
Okay.
And he knew more than I did. And he'd worked for Chris for Brock Cellars. He'd worked there
Okay.
as like I think an intern or something like that. And so he knew the processes.
You'd seen how some other people work.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So he had a little routine that I kind of saw and used as a blueprint, basically. So I kind of had a general idea, but then he would kind of point out some tweaks that I could make. So that's how I started making natural wine. And then at first I was using, and the idea of like what natural wine is, that's a long discussion as well. But for me, if you use a little bit, I no longer use sulfur. I'm only working with organic fruit. But at that time, I felt it prudent to use sulfur and to work overtime. The idea was to work overtime and to work less and less with sulfur to see what the possibilities could be on that. And it took me about 5 years to have the confidence. And I would make one-offs here and there of no sulfur, and I'd see that the wines did well. And then like I said, over time, it's since 2017. So I started the winery in 2017. From that point on, I have not added sulfur to my wines.
Okay, so it was kind of a gradual
As an evolution.
It wasn't wasn't a line in the
Well,
sand.
and
exactly.
I tell people, and I tried not to be just purely dogmatic about it. I didn't want dogma for the sake of dogma. I didn't want to, and even now, where this collective enrichment is a 0-0 space. We've all agreed to work that way, and 0-0 to us, and I think almost everybody that I've ever talked to, is organic fruit and nothing being added, no filtration. Filtration isn't, I don't even consider that natural winemaking. If you're a natural winemaker and you're filtering, I don't care what your reasons are. You're a winemaker, not a natural winemaker. And so we got here, and even, we have problems, we have issues. We're dealing with living wines that we are wanting to encourage that vitality. And that's one of the reasons that we decided not to use sulfur. It's something, people will ask me, well, what is natural wine? And now that's a much more kind of foggy, nebulous idea.
Of course, yeah.
And what I tell people now, I used to tell them a lot. I just tell them a few different things. But now what I've really liked to attach to is it's a response to industrialization. Mostly because the idea is, like, I would tell people, I can't make natural wine without talking about farming. I got to talk about farming, and I can't talk about farming without talking about politics. That's the way it is. We got to think about our environment. At the end of the day, the earth isn't going to be here, forever. We're not going to be here forever. But there is something to taking care of the place that you live in. We just happen to show up here. We don't know how we got here, but we're here. And the idea of being intelligent should all, part of that, an intellectual part of that should be that we can see what we're doing is having a negative impact on our environment. And why do we want to do that? So we should be talking about, like, organics, for example. It's really, there's, in terms proportionally what's grown out there, organic is, I'm going to say, and I don't have any exact information, I read a lot, it's not readily available, but I'm going to say it's probably less than 5% of all farming is organic. And it's very depressing when I talk to people. And I've taken on, since 2016, I've taken on an active role in farming, taking on leases, and I've kind of been like a nomad, because I'll find a property that's not farmed organically and I'll farm it organically. And sometimes I kind of like butt up against somebody else's idea of the way something should look, an aesthetic. And I'm trying to tell them, well, here's what we have in terms of organic farming and what the goal is going to be. It's a little different look, but it's just not bonsai'd.
And is that 5%? Is that viticulture or 5% of?
I think it's a guess. So
Okay.
Don't quote me on it, but because I don't see the numbers. And if the numbers aren't readily available, all I can tell, this is anecdotal. This is my experience with going out and finding it. I see it in the market, but if you go to the market and you look at the amount of conventional produce available compared to the amount of organic, I think just visually you can see that, because if I'm looking at Whole Foods, if I'm going to Whole Foods, well, their whole idea was on organics, right? So they're going to have a disproportional amount of organics than something like Safeway. Then if I go down to Smart and Final, that's another drop down. So if you look at what is produced, and then it's my experience based on trying to find organic grapes to work with, they're there, but they're not. It can be a lot of work to find it. And here's the other thing that I will make I always make very, very clear. Sustainable is not, certified sustainable or any kind of sustainable is not organic, and they should not be confused. And it's very misleading when I hear people use sustainable like it's as important as organic. It is not. You can still throw chemicals, you can still throw poisons at sustainably farmed vineyards. And people will say, well, sustainable takes into account labor. Well, organic should also take into account labor. Everything should take into account fair treatment of people and animals, of anything. That just should be a given. So I generally will point that out. But yeah, so finding the organics has been a lot of work.
How does that generally work if you find a vineyard that you'd like to farm? It's just approaching the current farmers or the owners and trying to convince them to switch over to organic over a couple years.
Okay, so that's another. So to get into certified organic, I think it takes something like 5 to 7 years. I don't remember exactly. I've never done that. I have worked with a few certified organic vineyards, and I've talked to those growers, and pretty much they tell me it's really not that difficult to do it. You just have to have documentation and only use what's approved, and then having someone come out and inspect. For me, when I talk about that my fruit is organic, it's organically farmed. So when I'm working with it, so certified organic is there's even less certified organic. And I think that there may be in other ag industries more certified organic because maybe it's beneficial. If you're going to have a contract with Whole Foods, then it's like scale and it's larger, and I'm not sure exactly what goes into that.
If you're the one out in the vineyard, you know what you're putting into it,
and
maybe the certification isn't as important to
I
you.
think so. My wife and I just bought a vineyard in Sonoma. It's 24 total acres. It's 11 acres under vine. It has not been farmed organically. We just took actually the seller is still living there for another couple of weeks, and then we'll have it. And I don't want to. He's somebody who's has a lot of friends. He's been around. I don't want to ruffle his feathers, and I want him to be an ally. I don't want to make an enemy out of him. So I have shied away from telling. I told him I was going to farm organically, but I don't preach to him. And for me, it became organic as soon as I was in control of what happens in that vineyard, which is now. The former owner is not going to be doing anything. He'll talk to me like I'm going to use Roundup. I don't even acknowledge it. I just kind of let that float through again because I don't want to have to argue with him. But so for me, do I want it to be certified organic? I would like to be certified organic eventually. The first year that I get there is more observational, and that's how I generally approach vineyards. So I don't go looking at organic vineyards. I don't go looking for them, not organically farmed or whatever. I don't go looking for them. It is a little bit difficult. You kind of have to network your way through. So, and that's kind of like finding fruit as well. There's a couple approaches that people will use to finding fruit. They'll follow in where they see other people go and then try to get fruit. That's the easier way to do it. I early on tried to do it, but that was very frustrating because you have to then be networked, and that's a little harder. You basically get in line. Whereas I needed fruit, so I would kind of ask people if they knew anybody who had worked this way or that way. And then I would go through and I would vet people. So then that was this is when I started in 2013. So I had to learn. I had to learn this sustainable wasn't organic. And I had to also learn how to say, oh, can I see your ag report? Everybody has to fill out an ag report every year if they're using any treatment on the vineyard. You have to tell the government what you're using. So it's really easy to vet whether or not somebody's farming organically. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't know what that means, only as it relates to certified organic because they hadn't gone that path. But they would say, I don't use anything that I live in the vineyard. I live here. I don't want to use any poisons. I don't use Roundup. I don't use things that aren't approved for certified organic. But they don't necessarily want to mislead me by saying we are organic because they don't know what the full criteria in terms of the certified organic is. Okay. So then I kind of go through and I see what they're doing, and then I determine if I feel they're working organically. If I see anything, and we've done this before, where this community, this collective we have, if we find a vineyard, and we did this last year, we found a vineyard up in the Sierra foothills that was growing Grenache Blanc, and we all thought, great, Grenache Blanc. You don't see it. I'd like to work with it. It sounds like an interesting grape. And we all, 4 of us hopped into a car. We went out to this vineyard because they weren't giving us clear answers. So I said, let's just go on a field trip. Let's go up there. We went there and we got some information, and we 2 of the winemakers that evening completely vetted everything that was being used, came back and reported to all of us that this is a carcinogen, that's a carcinogen, and therefore we can't work with them. So yes, that's what we go through to figure out what people are using.
Okay, so very thorough.
Right, yeah. So that's it. It takes a little more legwork, and you have to ask questions. And sometimes people you don't want to offend somebody. So in terms of like finding a lease, the most recent one that I took was 2 years ago. What happened was the reason I didn't take a lease, I didn't look for a lease this past year, is because we were looking for a property to buy. Because I was tired of moving around, and I thought that the business was in a place where we could actually benefit from having a little piece of land. I wanted something. I ended up with something bigger than I thought. I wanted a couple of acres, but this opportunity came around that we jumped on, and I thought I could make the economics of it work.
How will that vineyard fit into Purity's production?
The varieties that are grown there are Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay with a little bit of Petit Syrah, a small amount of Petit Syrah. And usually produces about 30 to 40 tons. That's my general production, but I have other varieties like Syrah and Viognier, Marsanne, Gewürztraminer. I still want to continue to work with those. So I think what I may do before I just jump up in size, because jumping up in size isn't just a matter of saying, I want to get bigger. You have to have a network to be able to sell what you make. And my general production is between 25 to 35 tons. And that is, in terms of production, about 2,000 to 2,500 cases of wine. So I would, if I just absorbed what we just acquired, I would be doubling my production. And I don't want to do that because you still have to sell. At the end of the day, everything has to move. So my idea is to farm it organically. I'll sell some of the fruit and I'll keep some of the fruit. Then from my previous commitments, I'm going to probably hand over some of that to some of the other winemakers in this collective. I work with some growers that I really respect, whose fruit I really like. And I either want to keep things that I think are important for purity, or I want to give things away to friends that I know will take care of the growers. I don't generally tell people what to do in terms of growing, how they grow. I find growers that I like the way they're working. And for me, if it isn't broken, then I don't need to fix it. I did years back go into sustainable vineyards and try to talk these growers into becoming organic, and I would pay them extra. And that just became frustrating. You can't, you think, well, it's a good faith effort of showing the grower that this can be a profitable way to move forward. And if it isn't in your blood and you don't, it isn't in your
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 heart has to be
consciousness,
into it,
right? If your
right?
heart's not into it and you don't see the difference and you think that there's nothing wrong with industrial farming or sustainable farming, and then I mean, if you look at Roundup and say Roundup has a half-life, and I've had people tell me this, Roundup has a half-life. It turns into this and this eventually. Well, I was dubious of that. I don't take what chemical companies tell me as at face value. I just don't, because I think I've been around long enough and I've seen where people get misled all the time. That's why I make a point of saying sustainable is not organic. So yeah, I used to do that, and then I finally stopped because I don't have enough resources to make it my mission to go out and purely preach why people should be organic. I can lead a path, my own path, that's going to be smaller, but at least I can lead by example and say this is what's important to me. And that's part of, like, I was even talking with as a 00 winemaker, we have problems. We have the same problems that regular winemakers have, except we don't have the tools to control and fix those problems the way other winemakers do. So I was texting back and forth. I told people some years ago that I reserve the right to go back to using sulfur if my business starts to fail. And I still tell people today, I say, I don't have a problem drinking natural wine that has sulfur in it. There's a lot of things, I don't really have a problem. I want something that tastes good. It doesn't have to be under a dogmatic brand. If I'm at somebody's house and they pour me some wine that's not, say, natural, but it's a good wine, then I'm happy drinking it. This is the path that I choose to go down. And I don't sit there and talk about other natural winemakers who use sulfur and say, well, they use sulfur. And I might have a little inside joke with my coworkers, might throw shade in their direction. But really, I tell everybody here, I tell everybody, like, I don't mind. If you want to use sulfur, I'm okay with that. We became a space that evolved into this place, and we were doing it anyway. So I said, well, then why don't we codify this? And why don't we say this is what we're doing? Because we're doing it anyway. And even I was going back and forth with some winemakers last night. We were just texting, and I said, I don't know. Sometimes I get so sad at some of the wines that something that natural winemakers are really dealing with is this mouse situation, which is where something tastes a little bit like corn chips or corn nuts, that nutty kind of finish. And I don't like that. If it's a minor amount, I'm generally okay with it. I can tolerate it. I really don't like it. And I don't like to sell wine that comes off that way. And It's not to say that I haven't, but I'm generally clear about what I'm doing, and I allow people to make those decisions on their own.
How do you tend to deal with a wine that might be edging towards
Mouse.
mouse? Do you try to wait it out?
You try to wait it
Or
out, sure, and there are the economics. One of the reasons that I like pet nat. One of the reasons I make a lot of pet nat, I make about over a third of my production is pet nat, is I found it allows me both a lot of flexibility in what I'm making, because I've learned how to make pet nat where I can take two pet nats to naturally sparkling wine. I can make two pet nats and I can combine them, and now I have three pet nats. And the way that I combine them is by topping. If I top one with another. So let's say I have A pet nat, then I have B pet nat. Well, I can take some of A and put it into B when I'm topping, or some of B and put it into A when I'm topping. And I suppose conceptually, that's 4 wines that I can have. But what's really cool about pet nat is the way that I make pet nat is I let it sit on the lees until I need the wine. So the lees are the settlings, the yeast, the little bits of skin. They will develop and add more depth and nuance over time to a sparkling wine, to any wine. But in pet nat, they if you just leave them for a little bit longer, they'll start to evolve. So I'll come out of the season, out of harvest, starting to sell that year's sparkling wine. And then I can continue to sell that wine over the next 12 months, 24 months sometimes even 3 years, depending on what I want to hold back. But it's like an upside down pyramid, right? I'm going to start with the big part, and I'm going to move down over time and have a little bit of things left. That's really good for cash flow. Cash flow is really, really important for wineries. We're constantly hand to mouth at our level. And that's really important for us. And it's also the way that I make pet nat. It's very rare that I have a pet nat that has some mouse in it, because it's generally agreed that it's a more of a lactic acid bacteria. It's a strain of lab that causes the mouse. There is still a lot of mystery behind this exactly. It's like I tell people, we know how a hurricane forms. We know generally where it's going to go, and we know, but we don't know how it's going to develop. We don't know how big it's going to get, and we don't know exactly where it's going to land. For all the computer modeling we have, we can't answer those questions consistently, predictably. And a lot of that happens in with wine. Because like I say, it's organic chemistry, right? It's biology.
Yeah,
So there's
living.
a lot of connective paths. Like I tell people, if you want consistency, predictability, then use yeast, use bacteria, and use sulfur. And you're going to have, and you can make good wines like that. But we choose not to. I mean, there's an austerity, I suppose, to it, but.
That's great. Thank you. With the co-working space, it seems like you bring in kind of a larger amount of grapes that then get split out to some of the different wineries. Is that accurate? 5 wineries might get Muscat or Pinot Gris from the same vineyard and kind of do their own spin on
basically. What happened, so I put this operation together. Initially, it started as 2 winemakers. And we found a space. We looked around in Oakland and Berkeley. Those were the obvious first places we looked. We found nothing within our budget, nothing that looked attractive. So we ended up in Richmond. We found a great place in Richmond, but it was beyond our budget. So there were 2 winemakers, and we did the number crunching, and we decided, well, if there were 5 of us, this could work. And eventually, I brought up the idea of having a co-op. Well, my wife and I have a house, so we were in a place where we could sign a lease. And this space, over 5 years, the value of the lease is like $500,000. I never thought I would be in a place where I would be able, that to me, when I was a kid, is like, I'd have a house that cost $300,000 and I was going to, make payments for 30 years. I never thought I would be in a leased space where I would, over 5 years, spend $500,000. It does just beyond my conceivable notions. So I was it was very stressful for me to get into this situation. And we found 3 other winemakers. So there were 5 of us, and I made sure that everybody was online for committing to a 5-year monthly payment. And after the first year, nobody signed the charter. Nobody was running out on me, and everybody was honorable. Nobody left me in the lurch. Nobody left me on the edge of bankruptcy or anything like that. But I realized after the first year that I could probably, because nobody signed the charter, we had dropped a charter, we actually started to get a bank, work together. But then it got into this me and my, and how am I going to get, and I started, and it became the individual rather than the group. And so then I just turned to everybody after the first year and said, okay, if you want to walk away at any given point, you can walk away. Just give me some notice. And if you want to stay, then you can stay. But the co-op's not working. And I knew at that point that I wanted to put a collective together, that I thought that it could work, that I could charge people, and that we could create a community. So the idea was to have a community, a self-sufficient community where we would network together, where we would help each other on the business side. And that was very much like an ideological path, but I just sensed by talking to people, I believed that there were enough people that I could fill the space with, and I wouldn't have to worry about making the rent. And that has evolved on its own. So now I'm actually got through the first 5 years, and then I decided to double down and go in for another 5 years. So I'm in the beginning of the second 5 years, and you never know, things can change, but I believe that there's enough interest. And I see natural wine. Natural wine, when I started liking natural wine, it was a trend. Well, actually, when I started liking natural wine, it was nothing. It wasn't even a trend. It was just like one-offs, like this like esoteric type of thing. But it grew. Then it became a trend. Now I've heard people say, okay, it's not a trend, but it's a niche. So at some point it becomes something more significant. And I don't see natural wine slowing down at all, at all. I see people all over the world, all over the country, and I talk to other winemakers all over the world, all over the country. I do travel, and I always like to pick people's ears about what's going on, what their thoughts are. And I also go to these fairs around the country, and I talk to people who are just average people who read something in this food magazine or this newspaper, their local newspaper that wrote about what's natural wine. I'm talking people in their middle or older, later years are curious, what is this? And so that belief is what propels me to continue to grow and kind of leverage some things, mostly my trust in the future. So this collective that evolved from a co-op, and I make it clear we're not a co-op. I do make all the final decisions on how this thing works. But then I tell people, like, yeah, I can make whatever willy-nilly decision I want to make. But I can't alienate people in the collective. One, I have told everybody that this is a non-competitive space of a community of people who should be supporting the group. I like to talk about win-win-win, right? I win, you win, we win. We win together. We're stronger together. And I would ideally like people to start here and move on and find some other place and start something like this. Like, it doesn't have to be a competitive space. It can be, and oftentimes it is. There's a lot of times I've heard winemakers saying, I'm going to answer that question.
Yeah.
Talking about like fruit, I've worked with other winemakers who say, I don't want to share fruit with other people because I don't want us making the same wine. You can't make the same wine. There is both place, there is both the growing conditions in terms of the year, the type of weather we had, and there's also the personality that's making the wine. Three winemakers with the same fruit are not going to make the same wine. They might make some similar, but over the course of time, as time moves on, year over year over year, you'll see very different wines because of what we're choosing and how we're choosing to work with that space. The idea of terroir, it's thrown around all the time. I believe in terroir, but it's such an esoteric subject that I generally don't lean on it. Yeah, if you grow avocados someplace, you're going to have a certain relationship between the place that it's grown and the end product. If you grow tomatoes, if you grow strawberries, I think they're all going to have a voice of the place that they were grown. Maybe, possibly, wine has the ability to kind of like fine tune that frequency so that you can actually go, oh, but I barely understand terroir, and I've been in this all my life. I've been in this for 30 years. I've been in grapes all of my life. I grew up, my parents were migrant farm workers, and they picked fruit and they worked in vineyards along with other fruit. And so what everybody here is told, if you want to come in, you want to make wine, that you're going to have to make your wine. I don't make anybody's wine. I tell people I will oversee what they're doing, but I have to see a commitment of time, of thought, and of of the physical side, that they're going to be here and they're not afraid to lift things. And I tell people, from a small person to a big person. Smaller person, I mean, I can only lift so much stuff. There are bigger people than me around here. But we have forklift, we have tools that we can use. We also have the group, so if we need to move things around. So that's always like something that helps. And in terms of like the fruit, everybody has to kind of get their own. But if we find a resource like our Lodi Muscat, that place grows something like 30 tons. Well, if there's 10 of us here and some of us want a half a ton, some of us want 2 tons, some of us want 5 tons, we put something together, we pick up 18 tons and we're pretty much all working with it. That's how that falls into place. It is a resource where we like the farming. I like what Jake is doing out in Lodi, and it's a good variety that's probably underutilized. A lot of times you think of Muscat as being sweet and really forward and fruity, and we're showing that there are different versions of this. So yeah, sometimes we will work in vineyards, and not always. Like some of us, some of us will say, "Oh, I want to get some Chardonnay from that vineyard. I want to get some Petit Syrah from that vineyard. Do you have any? Is there any extra?" And that's the whole idea of like the networking. So sometimes we dip our toes in, sometimes we decide it's not our thing, and we can back out as well.
Yeah, I noticed how different, taking the Muscat, some of the wines were totally different from each other and totally different point of view on it, even though it came from the same grapes. There were orange wines, there were direct pressed Muscats or pet nat or blended with some Zin or something like that. So there was a whole kind of the whole gamut of styles made out of those grapes.
Well, and that's something too that I think is really cool about this space right now. That's where people talk about. I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and I was listening to a winemaker talk about a natural leaning winemaker in New York trying to sell his wines from Napa. And he was talking to the buyer, and the buyer was basically just talking down to him and saying, this stuff is horrible. Why are you making anything different than what should be made in Napa? Well, the thing is, like, who says what should be made where? And we're in such early years. I mean, really, the serious part of making wine in California isn't even 100 years old. I think after Prohibition, it got a little more focused, and then it continued on. And yeah, some areas became known for one thing or another, mostly because when you look at like the finer, what people considered fine wine, were what people would copy here. So if we look at what can grow here, what can we get known for? Well, let's plant Cabernet here. Let's plant Pinot Noir there. Let's plant things that are like the best of the best. And there used to be a lot more Riesling because German Riesling was considered the high point of great wine. Same thing with Burgundy, Pinot Noir, and then Bordeaux, the Cabernet. But we haven't really had that much time to truly get a sense of exactly what can do well where. And I think sometimes when you look at things like organizations like the AOC in France, where you delimitations in a geographic area. So if you're going to come from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, they decided that the Grenache is going to be the backbone of what gets produced there. Part of that had to do with marketing. Part of that had to be like, how do we get known over some other area? Well, if we pick to work with this variety that also seems to do well here, then that's what we're going to grow. But you see things changing and evolving anyway. Like when Tuscany started growing, I mean, Tuscany, Italy was growing Sangiovese, and then people in the 90s decided they wanted to throw Cabernet and Syrah in there to create these different wines to be competitive with the current market. What I like about what we're doing is we're experimenting, we're playing around. And if I want to take Zinfandel from Mendocino and I want to take Muscat from Lodi and I want to slap them together, the people who support me, they're down for it. They want to have some fun stuff. That's one of the other things that I really try to do is break down these walls of of things that should be, of getting rid of the pretentiousness, of getting rid of that dogma, that like, oh, well, nobody, what, this is ridiculous. Why would you mix Muscat and Zinfandel? I don't know, because it tastes good and it's fun. And I'm not so worried about saying that this is what Mendocino has to be, or this is what Sonoma has to be. We're all experimenting in a lot of ways, and who knows where I end up down the way in terms of what I end up bringing in. But like one of the wines I made this year, people ask me, what's your favorite wine? People would say to me things like, well, I just poured wine at this Nouveau party for Ordinaire in Oakland, and people have said, well, you make Nouveau. I mean, that's what you do. So it's easy for you because that's the style of your wine you make. I'm like, yeah, I have, let's see. I have in tank, I have a 2017 Syrah from Sonoma Mountain that I decided not to bottle because I want to see where it's going to go just by itself. That's after I macerated it for almost 2.5 years, whole cluster maceration. I had some other Syrah from the Sierra foothills that I left in barrel for 2.5 years plus. It didn't turn weird. It's a beautiful wine. I make a lot of different things. I make Amaro, which is a fortified, aromatized wine. And this year, one of my favorite wines is my Peace, Love, Happiness, which is a pet nat of Gravenstein apples, of Gewürztraminer grape, pluots, and blackberries. I can do that. And the wine is delicious. When I was coming up through wine, you would have been told you can't make that. Why would you? That would be a horrible idea. That wine is so exuberant and so pretty. Not only that, it's textured, it's nuanced, it's complex. It's a good wine on so many different levels, and I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm really, really proud of I'm not the only one doing something like that here. There are wines that I've had here, and I look at the people who come in and do that, and I'm just like, damn, I wish I had done that. Wow, that is so cool. And we're pushing each other. That's what's really cool about this collective is we really are supporting each other, challenging each other, and we'll call bullshit on each other too. I thought you said you'd never do something like that. I thought, how can you be doing this if you well, but how does that work with your philosophy? And it's and not even we're not it's just these subtle little things that will also say, why would you even do that? And that's what's really, really cool is that's that whole win-win-win is that we're raising each other. And I had somebody tell me who knows us who's familiar with this is a person who owns a restaurant. And he said, your space is making some really, really beautiful wines. This is just the beginning. I've been here for 5 years. It took me 3 years. Then we hit COVID. So I feel like I'm 2 years into starting to really see the potential of this space. And that's why I re-upped for the lease. That was another $500,000 commitment that I was like, I want to see where this goes.
And you're making some piquette now also, right? A couple different ones?
Well, all right, the piquette. I made a piquette. There was a woman here who her background is cooking, and she was making what she called, I think she called them natural sodas. For me, they were basically kombucha. And they were good because she has a cooking background. She was really making interesting for naturally fermented sodas, as she called them. She had a hard time selling. And I told her, the reason you're having a hard time selling is because you're basically selling kombucha. And the market for kombucha is very saturated. And if you look at shelf space at some place like Whole Foods, they can move kombucha. You're not going to be able to compete with those big companies. It's just not going to happen. So you either have to go to a farmer's market and try to find that niche that you can fill, or you have modifiers. You have to modify what you're doing. And I said, if you want to sell something, and she didn't want to make wine, because I like bringing people here and here are interested in ferments. I've been wanting to do lacto ferments here. I'd love it to meet somebody who wants to come in and really do some cool lacto ferments. I find pickles that are naturally fermented to have potential for so much complexity. They're really undervalued in our culture here. Mm-hmm. But I said, you might want to think about making piquette. That's something that you don't have to be a winemaker. And piquette is basically taking the pressings of a wine and adding water. In a simple way, that's all it is. But that's a real easy way to make an insipid drink. And I kind of helped her. I told her I would help her to make piquette. And I said, if I'm going to do it, you're probably going to want to somehow add some sugar. I like the idea of adding honey. And then you're going to want to flavor it with something. So she took that. She went and foraged and got some anise hyssop. She got some lemon verbena. She got fig leaves. And we made a couple of different piquettes. And those turned out really well. That was the first time I'd ever made piquette. It was a lot of work. The market really doesn't support piquette for what a good piquette should cost. You can't sell it for the same amount I've seen some people do it, but it's not practical to do it on a larger scale. And when I'm talking larger scale, if I make 100 cases of something, that's larger for me. But it's just not easy to sell at that normal wine price point. I made it. I think I both got lucky and I had also like what do you call? I had enough experience, and I knew where it could go south, and we bottled it up before it could get acidic, because you have issues dealing with acidity, and if you're adding water, you're lowering your acidity, so you want to be careful with that. So we made a really, really good piquette. And I still have some. I really don't sell it to resellers. I kind of sell it through the bar. I want to keep it. And this one is now, I think, 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
And people will say it doesn't age, and it's better. It's better now than it has been. And I think I don't know, it's not aging in any negative way.
Okay.
The winery is generally, we're near the water, and we're generally cold. We're freezing right now,
Yeah.
but we're generally a cool space. And that's why I situated ourselves here, so we wouldn't have to run air conditioning. I have talked to people about making piquettes. Sometimes they want to, and I'll kind of shepherd them a little bit. It's a lot of work for a little bit of compensation, and I'm not a full-on believer in piquette. I like the idea, definitely. Like, we send our pumice, our pressings, to a company in Richmond that will take them supposedly and make compost. I think they are making compost, but it's very expensive to take them away. We do 100 tons, about 120 tons of production in Richmond here in this space, and I generally spend about $7,000 to $8,000 just having somebody haul our pumice away.
Wow.
Well, next year, now that I have this property, I want to take it to the vineyard, and I'm going to make my own compost and try to save a few $1,000s. I mean, you still have to rent a truck, and I have to deal with the logistics of all that. But so yeah, I don't know that I will make. I might, if I'm inspired to do something fun in the future. It's easy enough to make. I may make more. Some of us are making it here. I generally will tell people, for the same amount of work, you can get more money, and we're it's not a cynical form. It's just that if you're gonna make something, I didn't start out being a piquette maker. So if somebody wanted to make piquette, I would say, well, if you can make the business model work, then cool. I think that would be, like I said, I'm happy with the way my piquette tastes, and if I could buy piquette that I liked, I probably would.
And then you also did a collaboration recently with Larry June, right?
A collab with Larry June. Okay, sure. People ask me how'd that happen. Well, there was a collab before that with. So I put a lot of feelers out in running a business like I do. I want to spread. Okay, I hope this doesn't sound any kind of, I don't know, obnoxious. I want to spread the gospel of organics, of natural wine. I want wine, especially natural, to be inclusive. I think that I'm Mexican. I generally, people always tell me, well, yeah, you don't act like you're, like this. Well, I really identify as Californian. I don't have a problem being Mexican, but when I grew up, wine really wasn't a part of my culture. It was more beer and spirit, if you went that way. Because we always, we read and we see on television or now wherever, there's a certain thinking behind traditional wine, and like sophistication and education and things like that. And whether it's a part of, I remember somebody telling me when I was learning about wine, well, that's not really your background. Like, why are you reading up about wine like yours? Somebody actually told me that.
Wow.
This was a long time when I was a kid, when I was 21.
Okay.
And I said, well, how do I learn about things if I don't like study them a little bit? And what's wrong with curiosity? But still, some of that definitely still exists. And I've been working to, even when I was working in restaurants, I'd have people come in and they'd be like, well, I would talk to them like, well, because I was enthusiastic about wine. I liked wine. I could sell wine. I could talk about wine. And coming from hospitality, my job was always to make people happy. Like, just to that was very important for me. That was hospitality. That was taking care of people. And I would go up, talk to people, and one of the common responses were I'd say, well, what are you looking for? What are you interested in? Well, I don't know anything about wine. And I'd say, well, like, you don't need to know a lot about wine. You need to just kind of like we're going to talk about like what you like. Like, for example, I don't know if you know how to make a pizza, but I bet you we could have a conversation about the different types of pizza that you like. And it's the same way, looking at it like it's food and lowering that pretentiousness down. And I've always felt that way, and I've always been. So when I got into wine, I wanted to be more inclusive of different people, different cultures, people who maybe weren't brought up or around it or comfortable with it. And also, there's different. Like, I've had people tell me, I don't really like wine, the traditional wine. I don't really like it, but then I drink this stuff and I really like it. Why is that? And and it has, that's aside from the culture. That's just the product that somebody identifies with and can like. A lot of times, beer people will like natural wine because it has a lot
there's
of
a lot of crossover.
There is a lot of
Yeah.
energy. I still think wine is wine and it tastes like wine, but I do see the similarities. So inclusiveness has always been important. I've always kind of put it out there that I like the idea of collabs, of integrating other things. Now I've gotten to a point where it's really like I'm starting to have this community of art, food, wine, and music, and I love it. And we're taking the walls and we're taking those what people might have thought of as, you need to be a certain place before you can appreciate this type of thing. That's bullshit. And I'm showing that more and more and more, and opening up a broader audience. That's what's important for me to do, is open up the broader audience. Somebody reached out to us that was part of a PR firm in LA with '03 Greedo, who's also a hip hop artist. He's actually incarcerated in Texas right now. It's a sad story. But so kind of like, and then I've just put the feelers out. I became friends with this owner of a place in Oakland called Pothead that was plants and weed, and she wanted a little bit of wine there to sell. And some of her neighbors found my wine, and they liked that that I didn't have these pretensions. And so I met this other group of people that led to me, that led to Larry. They thought, and they're all musicians. They have a whole community that they're sharing with me. One thing led to another, and Larry wanted to do something, and I said I'd be down for doing it. Let's talk about what this or that is, and let's talk about a label. And it was important for me to have a label that I wasn't going to be back labeled. I said, if I do something, I don't have to, my name, Purity, doesn't have to be as big as Larry's, but it's got to be there up front. Because if we're collabing, I'm not going to do something that's not authentic. And I know that Larry's a celebrity, and I'm not going to try to take any of Larry's limelight, but I don't think Larry should be worried about me taking any of his limelight anyway. But I need it to be so that people can actually say, oh, well, that's cool of you to be able to do something like that and not worry about whatever there is to maybe worry about. That's kind of how it came about, and he was pretty chill about it. We had a conversation on the phone and talked about some options. One thing led to another. So even though it wasn't a collab on the making of the wine, it was a collab on choosing the wine and then what the label was going to look like and how we were going to roll it out. And that's something that I continue to be open to. And I have collabs with a lot of different people. Again, it gets back to the win-win-win.
And you've been in maybe 2021 where you started incorporating other artists into your labels.
That's right. Yeah, art for a purpose. That was kind of when I first started. I modeled my label after an Austrian winemaker whose name is Moritz, Moric, Moritz, and I liked his label because it was the font was very clean, and it was just a very clean label. It was immediately recognizable. And one of the problems I had with artwork was that I noticed I'd go to a store and I could see artwork, but I could never really identify who the winemakers were. Not only that, but I found like that there was this fashion of putting just artwork, like especially with natural wine, like just putting anything on a label. And I didn't want to copy what everybody else did. So I thought, well, I'll leave the artwork up to other people initially, and I'll get the purity. I want people to recognize purity wine and to recognize what that looks like, just visually. So I spent a few years doing that. And then we started having people, we got more and more, as we got bigger, higher in production, people started reaching out to us, artists. Do you have any interest? And then at first it was no, thanks. And then one day I was just, I don't know what happened. I just thought, what would be cool is if we could work with artists. I don't want the same artwork on the same label every year in and year out. Rather have an evolution and work with artists where we could bring attention to maybe little known artists or artists that are kind of like starting to kind of like make a little, move and want to get known, would like to maybe sell their art. And I thought, here we are. I have just one barrel, which is 25 cases, is 300 bottles. And with just one barrel, I could get eyes, at least 300 eyes, right, on a bottle. And somehow to be able to connect people, they saw a piece of art. So I thought that would be cool if like years from now, like people could be like, let's check out what what the labels are going to be that Purity is going to come out with this, what the fresh, what the refresh is. And, like to be able to reach out to people and maybe buy their artwork and support them. I thought that could be really handy, and it make things interesting on my side and continue to support that community, that idea of art, music, food, and wine. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how that came about. And what we do is we don't pay for the artwork. We don't buy the artwork. We pay for the permission to use the artwork on a given SKU, on a given wine for a given year, for a limited amount of time. And then years over, we just move through different artwork, different artists is the idea. So we're in the second year of doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's been really cool because and then also playing around and like what, like sometimes I have to manipulate the artwork, and I don't do it to make it better. I don't want to edit the artwork, but sometimes I'm finding for it to fit the format, I have to make some changes. So that in general, I will go to the artist and say, are you okay with this?
Okay.
I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to co-opt their work. I don't want to use them. I want it to be something where we both feel strongly about it. And so far that's been really cool. And I see that getting richer and better.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy with that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. People are able to get your wines if they don't know.
Okay, I'll make this as brief as possible. When COVID happened, my wife lost her job. She worked in a restaurant. She lost her job, and she said, well, okay, I don't know where things are going to go or how we're going to handle this. And I said, I think we're going to be okay. I said, I think I'm going to need your help because I want to pivot and I want to really focus on direct to consumer, doing a project where we have do a case, like a case special price, a mixed case, dealer's choice kind of thing. And we did that, and it took off. And it did very well. And I was able to bring Barry in to help. The community supported us. One of the things that's really important for me is that I don't want any click-throughs. I don't want to set up a website that's a click-through. I want people to know that we're here. I want people to know that we're a small family operation, and I want them to get to know us. That's really important because in a day, in an era where you go on and you can't get anybody on the phone, just simple things. It's hard to do with interaction with other people. I want to be people at the other end. And I said, we have Instagram, Purity Wine. We have our bar, which is the Study Wine Bar. We have our website, which is puritywine.net, I think. Everything has our contact information. You can DM us, you can text us, you can email us, whatever you want. And one of the things that I think is really cool about what we do is when you reach out to us, people will say, "Hey, how do I buy your wines?" And that was one of the things that I really wanted Barry to, because she was going to help me with the direct to consumer stuff. I want to get back to people as quickly as possible. We'll do that, and they'll say, "How do I get your wines?" And I'm like, "Well, like this. What are you in the mood for? What do you like?" We have a special, which is generally a case, like it's kind of discounted, and then we can do 1 bottle, 3 bottles, 6 bottles, but it's the best prices on the case, and that is inclusive and brings you into experimenting with our wines, gets you a price that's really generous, but you might get things that you wouldn't normally pick out. So that's kind of how is just reach out to us, and we really do like touch. We like talking to people. We like getting to know people who are supporting us. And building that community is something we want to continue to do. And like I tell people, like if you buy wine from us and it's that case special, you don't like something, just tell us. We'll refund you, we'll replace it, we'll do whatever it takes to make it right. But we want you to trust us. And we want to build that trust by proving ourselves. That's it.
That's a great place to end.
Excellent. This has been a lot of fun.
And you've got your first customers.
Perfect. And the doors are open.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Noel for the Indie Wine Podcast. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening today, and also the Instagram at IndieWinePodcast for updates, or email IndieWinePodcast@gmail.com. Next episode, we'll have short interviews with some of the winemakers from the By the Way Festival held at the Study Wine Bar. Thanks again. Have a good one.